and
Hi there.
Alex.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I see Cecilia there from Furlong Fox. Hello, how are you? It's great to be here again. Thank you, TL Portfolio, for putting this all together. And we look forward to presenting on Uganda and Rwanda, a beautiful part of Africa. I'm not supposed to be biased, but possibly my two favorite countries in Africa. I know in the previous one we covered Kenya and Tanzania, but this is a real special place in my heart. So, yeah.
Perfect. So as we get started, for anybody that is joining us, please feel free to add any questions on the chat as you are doing right now. And towards the end of this introduction, we'll go over all of them and we'll get you answers. So Alex, the floor is yours.
Brilliant. I quickly want to say hello, Analia. Hello, Andrea. Welcome. And yeah, as everyone knows, we're covering Uganda and Rwanda today. It seems to be one of the hot topics in African travel, a beautiful part of the world, an unbelievable experience. Of course, there's some nitty-gritty details behind the two destinations, so I hope to cover all of those. And as Natalia said, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat. We'll cover them at the end. And without further ado, let's go on. This is just sort of a page to go over what we're going to cover in this presentation, what we're going to try to cover in this presentation. A lot of the information you'll see on the screens as we go will be text heavy. Don't worry, I'm not expecting you to read through everything that are on the slides. A booklet will be sent afterwards that has all the information that you can read through with in your own time to really get a deep dive. This is more to get an understanding about the destinations and what they have to offer. Before we get into it, a little bit about Journey Beyond, who we are. My father, Philip Laatgan, started this company 23 years ago, but he himself has been in the luxury travel industry for 45 plus years, starting with overland safaris, moving his way up into owning lodges, and then, of course, now being the owner, founder, and chief explorer of Journey Beyond, with myself having joined the business 3 years ago, but growing up in it for 25 years. And with the title of Explorer in Training, I think I deserve the Chief Explorer maybe in 40 years from now. We have a real focus on luxury travel into Africa at the five-star deluxe market. We have a sister company owned and managed by the same team, which is Private Ocean Islands, which covers all the Indian Ocean islands and the Maldives. And then, of course, a major thing to us, and one of the reasons we exist, is because we have personal experience in all the destinations, specifically these two that we are talking about today, which helps us guide you on planning the best itinerary for your special clients. I said these are my two favorite destinations, but if I were to pick one personally onto my favorite destination in Africa, Rwanda, the land of 1,000 hills. The photo in the background can never really do it justice, but Rwanda really does seem to go on forever with these misty clouds that come over the scenery through the hills. And as the nickname that Rwanda has, the land of 1,000 hills says, it really does have thousands of hills for you to look onto during your time. If you remember, and if you were part of the Kenya and Tanzania part of this training sessions, there was fewer flights in terms of access into a destination. In terms of getting into Rwanda and later on when we get into Uganda, there are no real direct flights from major destinations on your sides of the world in South America or in North America. It's more so connecting through Europe or the Middle East or through Ethiopia. But a big thing I want to highlight with access into Rwanda is usually Rwanda is at the end of an East African itinerary, where there are direct flights from, say, the Serengeti or the Masai Mara into Kigali. So you would be coming from Kenya or Tanzania into Kigali, offering a very seamless logistical sort of plan. Ooh, I've clicked off the screen. There we are, the two main stars of the show, as Natalia pointed out on the right there, one being a gorilla and one being a little golden monkey, often overlooked. But some of the unique selling points of Rwanda, of course, it would be hard to go into this page without mentioning the stars of the show, the animals, the gorillas, the chimpanzees, and the golden monkeys, and all the other primates that live in these forests of Rwanda. A big highlight that I want to bring out, though, that is why it's my favorite country that I've been to, is actually the history and the culture that Rwanda has. If none of you know, in 1994, Rwanda went through a pretty atrocious genocide. Not to go into any details on that, I urge you to read up more about it. But in the 23 years since that genocide, the country has really turned around. The politicians have taken control. The country is bound together and turned into this amazing country of unity, of love, of togetherness. And with that, have really promoted a fantastic, strong tourism front to the rest of the world with their stars of the
Alex,
show primates.
I'd also want to add that it's probably the cleanest country in the world. Forget Switzerland, forget anywhere else. Rwanda is simply the cleanest country.
Absolutely. They have a day in Rwanda called Umuganda Day. It's a bit of a mouthful to pronounce, but it's basically a day on the last Saturday of every month. The entire country comes out of their homes onto the streets and they clean rubbish up, and then they meet as a community in the communal area and talk about what's going on in the community, how they can better themselves, how they can better their neighbors. It's a really, really fantastic setup that they have in Rwanda, which is why it sort of sticks with people as they leave the country. Going into the depths of Rwanda and the national parks, I really wanted to show this map because it shows the distances between the three national parks in Rwanda. Nyungwe Forest being the forest where the chimpanzee trekking takes place, Volcanoes National Park in the north on the border with Uganda, where the gorilla trekking takes place. And on the far east is Akagera National Park, a little bit of a more unknown park, but is where the Big Five exists and where your Big Five game drives would take place. And it does sort of offer Rwanda as a one-stop destination for people who want to do safari, who want to trek gorillas, who want to trek chimpanzees, and then go home. As we go on in the presentation, you'll see my suggestion is tending to combine it with, say, your Kenyas and Tanzanias. But if someone is set on fully experiencing Rwanda, they can do it all in one destination. On the right side of your screen, you'll see the drive times. Something really important to understand with Rwanda is there are no airstrips in the sense of what we're used to in the rest of the world. In South Africa, you can fly on small fixed-wing aircrafts from Johannesburg to the Greater Kruger. In Kenya and Tanzania, you can fly on small planes between the national parks or from the major cities. In Rwanda, there are only two options. You either drive between the destinations or you take a helicopter. The helicopters are really expensive. It has everything to do with the altitude that Rwanda's at and with the fact that the weather doesn't always play game. But the saving grace is the fact that Rwanda's road system is fantastic. It is perfectly paved roads, really well marked, really safe, really comfortable, something that someone can enjoy as they look out the window and they look at this amazing landscape going up mountains, down mountains, through the communities, through the villages, jumping out if you're like us and getting a skewer of goat and really getting involved in the community on your way to Volcanoes National Park. But as you can see, they're not short drives. It's anywhere from 2.5 hours to 5.5 hours, depending on which national park you're trying to combine. For instance, if you were to go from Nyungwe to Akagera, you would be looking at about 8 hours of driving. It's not something we'd suggest. You would probably overnight in Kigali to break it up, but it can be done. But it's just sort of to get your head around how you get around the country. What is Rwanda best for? Of course, at the head of this is primate interactions. Rwanda is the industry leader for getting close up and personal with gorillas, close with chimpanzees and primates like your golden monkeys. There are other primates in these forests that you can interact with, not necessarily on a trek, but whilst you're searching for one of these larger primates, you may bump into them, and your guide, because you have a professional guide everywhere, will give you a few little facts and figures and sites about them. Of course, a really big point to understand about Rwanda and Uganda is if anyone wants to do any of these trekking activities, your gorillas or your chimpanzees, you have to be 15 years or older. There are some very few instances where if someone is turning 15 in the year or is part of a big family and is 14, you can ask the park rangers or the park heads if there can be an exception. That has to be done quite a few months ahead of time. And even then, it's not always a guaranteed yes, they can do it. We have had no's, but if you have clients who have older 14-year-olds or a big family with a 14-year-old in it, don't discredit Rwanda or Uganda entirely. A plan can be made. This is Africa after all. Of course, as I was mentioning earlier, a really great way to sell Rwanda is as a combination destination with safari. So typically someone would start in Kenya, they'd do safari in the Masai Mara, they'd come down to the Serengeti. And from the Serengeti, they can fly easily directly through Mwanza into Kigali and finish their trip gorilla trekking. It's also a fantastic end. It's a bit of a come down from the excitement of safari when you have early mornings and late nights. Now you have an early morning trek, but then a lot of the day just to enjoy your hotel or your lodge and to enjoy the spa treatment, as some of us may. So yeah, it's a great destination for combining with safari. A sort of outline, this is a question we get a lot, is what is your proposed Rwanda itinerary? Now, every client is different, every purpose for travel is different, but as I said, typically someone's combining this with safari from East Africa. In some cases, they're combining it with safari from South Africa. There are direct flights between Johannesburg and Kigali itself, as well as Johannesburg and Entebbe when we get to Uganda. But this would be my recommended itinerary. One night in Kigali, you'll see I put a little point there saying important. In most cases, when you do an overnight, whether it be in Johannesburg or an overnight in Nairobi, you're sort of losing a day of travel, and that's typically because flights arrive too late, or even if they arrive in the middle afternoon, there's not much to do in those cities. There are a few things, but nothing of real substance. When it comes to Kigali, starting your itinerary in Kigali with a person going and seeing the Genocide Museum, the Parliamentary Museum, and all the cultural site visits around Kigali gives the traveler a huge perspective of what they're about to experience. It takes them into the history of the brutality of that genocide that I mentioned, and then gives them a new perspective of when they drive around and they see how friendly and how organized and how loving everyone is, of what really we as humans are capable of in terms of a turnaround. So that one night in Kigali, even if someone arrives at a stage where they could connect to Nyungwe or could connect to volcanoes, I would still recommend staying a night in Kigali at the front end of an itinerary before going on. Of course, when people come to Uganda, to Rwanda, they typically try to see both the chimpanzees and the gorillas. It does involve quite a bit of driving, which is why doing 3 nights at Nyungwe is important, and 4 nights at volcanoes is what we recommend. With 4 nights in volcanoes, it allows someone to do 1 or 2 gorilla treks and a golden monkey trek, as well as having time during the day to visit, say, the Diana Fossey Museum, or go into the local villages for either shopping or just cultural experiences in general. And that leads us on to Uganda, the Pearl of Africa. Now, it was nicknamed the Pearl of Africa because when it was discovered, the person who discovered it said, "This is one of the most beautiful countries I have ever experienced and seen. It must be the Pearl of Africa." As you can see in the background, the terrain is also mountainous, hilly. The topography is super lined. It's a lot of Uganda is farmed agriculturally outside of the national park. So a lot of the hills that you see are just like these ones in this photo, on the edges of Great Lakes, looking at farmed mountainsides with huge communities throughout. Completely different to what Rwanda feels like, but yeah, as beautiful. Access into Uganda, quickly going to skim through these. As you can see, there's a lot of flight options. But again, most people going to Uganda are tacking it on to the end of a safari experience in East Africa, say Tanzania or Kenya, or from South Africa with the direct flights from Johannesburg to Entebbe, meaning that a lot of these flight options, unless someone is determined to only visit Uganda would not be used.
Yeah, Alex, I think we should tell everybody at this time why we say finishing on the gorillas, not only because of the highlight of that, but also the acclimatization.
Absolutely. A lot of the clients who are coming from South America or North America come from relatively low altitude places. Of course, there are places in South America with very high average altitudes, but if you're from New York or California, you're living at basically sea level. Um, in Rwanda, you're anything from 4,000 to 5,000 feet above sea level, super high altitude, which not a lot of people are used to, making gorilla trekking all that more difficult because the air is quite a lot thinner. Myself and my dad live up here in Johannesburg, so we're also at around 4,000 feet above sea level, so we're quite used to it, and which made it a bit easier for us. But a lot of people do need a day or two to acclimatize by tacking Rwanda or Uganda onto the end of a Kenyan itinerary or Tanzanian itinerary. You're coming up in the sea level feet to acclimatize before getting to Rwanda, Uganda, where you can start your trekking and not be as affected by altitude sickness or just the negativity of altitude in general, to make the experience that 10% better and more enjoyable. Going on with the USPs of Uganda, in both cases between Rwanda and Uganda, they have year-round climates that are enjoyable. They're on the equator. People will say that there's a rainy season and a less rainy season, which by definition is true, but in both cases, they are rainforests. It rains all year, most days, pretty much every day, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. If someone's coming to either Uganda and Rwanda specifically for gorilla trekking and not expecting to get rained on because it's the low rain season, you have to tell them that's not the case. They will be rained on. I can almost guarantee it. But it's not terrible rain. It's not thunderstorms. It's not super heavy. Gets you a little bit wet. As it moves on, the sun comes out, and because you're on the equator with all the humidity, you dry out really quickly. It's part of the experience, in my opinion. But very similar to Rwanda, the USPs are people have to be 15 years or older to gorilla trek. There's gorilla trekking and fantastic chimpanzee trekking in Uganda. And an extra USP for Uganda is the rare bird species. As you can see on the right side of the screen, is the shoebill stork. The shoebill. Sorry, I nearly said stork. I got corrected about that a few months ago. It's not a stork. It's a shoebill. And other bird species. So for birders who want to see the big five, who want to see gorillas and chimpanzees, and then want to tick off some very niche bird species, this is a fantastic destination for it. The national parks, Uganda is a much bigger country compared to Rwanda. So there are a lot more national parks, but it is a very densely populated country with that. So a lot of the places outside of these national parks is inhabited by people. It offers great experiences from a cultural point of view because of that. But the main national parks to really take note of is Bwindi Impenetrable Forest and Mgahinga Gorilla National Park. These two areas are where the gorilla trekking takes place. Queen Elizabeth National Park is where your big five sightings have, and this is a drivable distance, I would say. Kibale is where you can see chimpanzees. Same as Similiki with fantastic elephant sightings and chimpanzees. Murchison Falls, again, chimpanzee trekking, and Kidepo up here, really out of the way, but still a beautiful area and something that someone may want to include in an itinerary. Actually, before I go on, I do want to highlight something really important with Uganda because of its size. Entebbe, the capital city where you fly into, is about an 11-hour drive to Bwindi. If someone goes and Googles it, it's going to tell you it's 7 hours. I can tell you from personal experience, it is not 7 hours, it's 11 hours. And that's because of the population that I mentioned in Uganda, and because about every 5 to 7 kilometers, there's a speed bump to slow cars down. So it's a very uncomfortable 11 hours. Our 100% recommendation is that Uganda should be done via flights. You can fly on fixed-wing flights to Bwindi Impenetrable Forest, to an airstrip like Kihihi, which is about 2 hours away from Nikaringo. These are a lot of names I know I'm throwing around, but I'll get into it as we go into the next slide. Or fly to Queen Elizabeth National Park From here, you could relatively comfortably drive to Kibale or Simaliki, or down south to Bwindi or Mgahinga. Mgahinga is also just on the border with Rwanda. This is Volcanoes National Park over here. So you can also fly into Rwanda, drive for 4 hours to Volcanoes National Park, around it, and into Mgahinga, if people don't maybe have the budget for the flights out to Bwindi or Mgahinga from Entebbe. Then we get into Bwindi Impenetrable Forest, which isn't quite as straightforward as Volcanoes, where there's one gorilla HQ. At Bwindi Impenetrable Forest, there are 4 major trekking locations: Nikaringo, Bohoma, Rohija, and Rushaga. Most of the lodges that we would be selling live in Nikaringo. That's where Clouds exists. That's close to where Asilia is going to be, the new Asilia product. And the Bohoma side of Bwindi Impenetrable Forest, that's where Sanctuary has its lodge and where Bwindi Lodge exists. There are good lodges around Rohija and Rushaga too, but they're more towards the high 4-star bracket, and your 5-star lodges are really between the two of these. There's also a fantastic way to combine Nikaringo and Bohoma. There's a primary forest walk where you cross the Evi River, you go through the primary forest, you pop out, and at Bohoma, basically 200 meters out of the primary forest walk on your left is Sanctuary, and about 300 meters down from that is the Bwindi Lodge. A big differentiator between secondary and primary forest. Secondary forest is where the Batwa tribe used to live. Those are the indigenous people of Uganda, where they used to cut down trees, sell the wood, use the wood to build their own their houses or their tools. The government pulled them out of the forest to conserve the animals that they were killing and eating, and put them into a different location. But because of their interaction with the forest is much denser with younger, thinner trees. As you go through the secondary forest, you pop into the primary forest where these massive 150, 200 feet tall acacia trees, umbrella acacia trees span over the sort of canyons, which is a completely different perspective. During that walk, you can pop into unhabituated gorilla families or chimpanzees or other little primates throughout it. It's really a fantastic experience. And if a client has 5 nights, they could do 3 nights, say on the Nikaringo side, walk over to Bohoma and do 2 nights on the Bohoma side, trek 2 different families, gorilla families, and experience more of Uganda itself. Uganda is best for, it's very similar to Rwanda. Anyone who has the passion for sort of raw Africa. Raw Africa to me is someone who has a bit of a sense of humor, who knows that the roads aren't going to be quite as tailored. The roads in Uganda are much less refined as the ones in Rwanda. Not all of them are tarred or surfaced. It makes for good 4x4ing and quite an exciting sort of adventure, but it is something that people have to understand is not quite as refined. Again, children of 15 years or older, multi-gen families, great for honeymooners. You know, you're perched on the side of these beautiful mountains overlooking a vast space. What more could a honeymooner want on their honeymoon? Again, because Uganda has a much larger country with much more national parks, it is more of a one-stop destination. I'd still suggest a lot of the game viewing to be done in East Africa, in either Kenya or Tanzania. But you can do it in Queen Elizabeth National Park. But a fantastic itinerary would be 3 nights at Murchison Falls, 3 nights Queen Elizabeth National Park, 4 nights at Bwindi, Murchison Falls to see your chimpanzees, Queen Elizabeth National Park to see your big 5, Bwindi, of course, to see your gorillas. There are so many other beautiful parks like Simaliki and Kibale that could be chucked into this. This is just sort of an outline of what exists. Now we wanted to highlight what we've been speaking about, the gorilla trekking, rated as one of the most remarkable wildlife encounters in the world, to read it off the screen. It really is one of those experiences clients will do and they'll think, oh, yes, I'm going to go gorilla trekking, and they'll finish and they said, oh my God, that was one of the most life-changing experiences I've ever had. The same can be said for chimpanzees, but gorillas just have this peace and this beauty and this power about them that really is quite humbling to a person. The experience itself, To walk you through how a day of gorilla trekking happens is you wake up at around 6:30, depending on which lodge you're at and how long it's going to take you to get to the gorilla HQ. Gorilla HQ meetup is 7:30 a.m. That's where you get introduced to your head ranger, who's going to talk you through the family you're going to see, how many silverbacks do they have, how many blackbacks do they have, how many females do they have, and how many children do they have. Is there any history about them? Before you see the animals, they teach you everything there is about that gorilla family so that you're prepared for what you're about to see. You then depart from the gorilla HQ at around about 8:30 towards where you start your trek. In our case, it was about an hour drive away from the gorilla HQ, and in some cases, it's about a 10-minute drive away. It really is dependent on which family you're trekking and which country you're in. Yeah, Dad?
Alex, don't forget the lovely Rwandan coffee in the morning before you
Absolutely.
head out, and it's free,
In,
so you get
in
something
both
extra
cases,
for your need.
absolutely. In both cases, in both Rwanda and Uganda's case, there are refreshments, but in Rwanda's case, they have the number one Rwandan coffee spot at the Gorilla HQ, which is included in your trek. And these smiles and dances and people all gathering around one area with one common goal before you trek, it really gets you excited about what you're about to do. A really important thing to understand is how the hike then goes. Gorillas are animals. They move around. It's a great, yeah, exactly, Elizabeth. It's great attraction, good coffee. Um, a really important thing to understand with a gorilla trek and to explain to your clients is these are animals. They move with free will and however they want to move. How you're able to trek a gorilla family is where the rangers left them the night before, where they nested. Every night, gorillas gather in one area, they build their own nests, and they sleep in a nest every night. They then trek directly to that spot and they track them to where the gorillas are. Then they radio the head ranger that's taking you as the trekkers up, and you meet wherever the gorillas are. I want to stress the chances of seeing the gorillas is almost 100%. And there's a big worry or controversy that people think there is that, oh, what if I don't see the gorillas? I have to do 2 treks, this and that. The only thing that's going to stop you from seeing gorillas is torrential rain or dangerous weather. In our case, when we did the trek, I can prove it to you because we trekked for 5 hours up the mountain because our gorillas kept moving further up away from us. Usually you trek for about an hour and a half, and then you spend, no matter how long it takes you to get to the gorillas, you spend 1 hour with the family, interacting with them from a distance, watching their habits, watching their movements. But again, these animals are animals. They can do whatever they want. You're not allowed to get within 5 meters of them, but they're allowed to get within 5 meters of you. In our case, the guides talk you through exactly what an animal's behavior is going to do, how they're going to move, how they're going to act, and watch a silverback, slap on his chest as he run past you, or a female walk between you and the partner next to you. Then once you've finished your hour, you come back down the mountain, get back into the vehicle, and the vehicle usually will then take you straight back to your lodge. In the cases of using some of the high-end lodges like Singita, Wilderness, One and Only, or Clouds, those vehicles will be there waiting for you with your guide that has been taking you around and take you straight back to the lodge, not via the Gorilla HQ. Now we get into why would you choose Uganda and why would you choose Rwanda? Someone's already pointed it out. Vivian, I believe. Absolutely. That's one of the biggest factors in choosing between Rwanda and Uganda is the gorilla permit costs. In Uganda, it costs $800 per person per trek. In Rwanda, it costs $1,500 per person per trek. Both countries offer fantastic alternatives from a trekking point of view. In Rwanda's case, you're able to purchase a private trek. Now, those are for your ultra high-end clientele because they're $15,000 per private trek and up to 8 trekkers. If you have a family of 8, the best is just to buy 8 permits. They'll put you into the same group. They would not split you up, so it's cheaper at the price. But if you have a family of 3 or 4 or 5, or even a couple who want to do it entirely by themselves, you can buy a private trek where you go up the mountain with your ranger guide and no one else is allowed to join you. Whereas on the Ugandan side, they have an amazing experience called the habituation experience. How a chimpanzee family or a gorilla family becomes habituated is 3 years of daily contacts with humans. Usually this is done by rangers, where they go up, they study the animals, and vets to make sure that the animals are well and healthy. And at around about the 2-year mark, they open those families up to what's called the habituation experience. At this stage, the animals are 90% habituated to human beings, and every now and again can be a little bit more fluctuation in emotions, and can either stay further away from people or come closer to people because they're curious. But it's a 3-hour experience, whereas a normal trek is 1 hour. So in a habituation process, you would hike up to whichever family you're hiking. You would spend 3 hours with the animal, which again still has a year left of habituation. As part of the habituation process, you learn about why it happens, you learn about who the family is, what the big details about them are, and then after 3 hours, you would come back down. You could also go up with vets who are trying to assist the elderly or the sick animals, and it's just a different selling tool when it comes to conservation. Of course, Uganda is bigger, so it has a greater diversity in animals. That's just because there's more national parks, although Rwanda still has all of the big five in Akagera, and then chimpanzees and gorillas. So I really want to highlight the biggest difference is the gorilla trekking permits. Of course, we've written at the bottom there that in Uganda, there are fewer luxury accommodations. Rightfully so, then Rwanda has more luxury accommodations. That's just the properties that have come in by their nature. Rwanda, if you don't know, has what we call the big three: Wilderness, One and Only, and Singita. And then Uganda has some fantastic, more family-run options like Clouds, a big brand like Sanctuary, and then another sort of owner-run operation called Bwindi Lodge. All of which are great 5-star options, but aren't your sort of 5-star deluxe. It does come through in the pricing of the lodges. So overall, Uganda tends to be a less expensive trip than Rwanda. And that's just what you could sort of expect on a trek like this. Such thick jungle density, not being able to see sort of 100 meters past you. It's incredible. You feel encapsulated, and suddenly you feel very small, even if you're a big human being. Just a little bit of an outline of what the pricing guidelines are for this part of the world. All of these lodges, except for Wilderness Sabinyo, are in Uganda and are the highest end lodges in Uganda, which is why we've called it 5-star. It's not quite high-end 5-star, and it's not quite your 5-star ultra luxuries like your Singitas. But as you can see, they sort of hover around anything from $1,000 to $1,500 per person per night, and then around about $500 to $880 per person per night, depending on the seasons. Again, you're not expected to understand this or know it immediately after reading a piece of paper. This will all be sent to you after the presentation. Wilderness Sabinyo, you'll notice, is considerably more expensive than the other three, but is still what we would classify as an entry-level 5-star lodge. It's more humble. It's not quite as big a room. The service is still great and the food is still good, but it's not quite your ultra-luxury or high luxury lodge. But it is quite a bit more expensive for the same standard in Rwanda than Uganda. Then your high-end properties, of course, there's the new Asilia that's opening later, either this year or early into 2026. The open date hasn't quite been set, which is in Uganda, which is going to be a really good high-end 5-star lodge. There, One and Only Nyungwe House in Nyungwe is not quite at the ultra-luxury standard of Gorilla's Nest, but again, we're looking at $1,800 to $2,000, depending on the property and depending on the time of the year. And then you get into your big dogs, your ultra luxury properties in Rwanda, which again, we're staring at down the barrel of $3,800 to $3,500 per person per night in high season, and $2,300, $2,500 in low season, or what's considered green season. Again, a really big thing to understand in Rwanda and Uganda based on the seasonality, because there is no real difference between green season and high season. It's just the demand sort of overflow from East Africa and from the American summers, June, July, August, September. Those are why those months cost what they do. It's because of demand, not because the experience is any worse or any better. So if you can get clients to travel in what we call green season or shoulder season, they would save considerably more dollars per person per night, making maybe an unaffordable trip more affordable for that person. And yeah, that is a bit about Rwanda and Uganda. As you can see, that's my mug in the background, and that's the Batwa tribe of Uganda. So if there are any questions that you feel I didn't cover during the presentation, please let me know. Thank you, Erica. We missed you this year at We Are Africa. Oh, Natalia, I think you're muted.
Any questions that you might have? This will be the perfect time to go over this. I am going to agree with you, Alex. These two destinations are magnificent. I left my heart in Uganda, so if you go back, if you try to find it, it's probably still there. But just amazing, amazing destinations. Is it possible to do this in Spanish? Not you, this, but not this. So do it all again, but in Spanish.
Like
Guides.
like in most parts of Africa, there are Spanish-speaking guides and Spanish-speaking services. In these two countries, particular, the demand for them is quite high and the supply for them is quite low. So it is one of those things, the longer in advance that we can plan an itinerary, which we know the Brazilians and the Mexicans sometimes don't. But the longer in advance we get, the more chance of being able to secure one. And of course, then it's a Spanish-speaking guide that would follow them around. A really big thing to understand about these two destinations is you will have a private guide and private vehicle, which is a Land Cruiser 4x4 with only 6 seats in it, that accompany you the entire duration of your stay. If you're going, even if you're flying between all the destinations in helicopters, you still have a vehicle that's driving between the two destinations. I see Irene. Hello, Irene. Fantastic to see you joining. I am doing much better. Thank you for asking. You can still hear the raspiness sometimes in my voice. Okay.
Yeah, there was a question. Let me just, are children allowed in the park with the gorillas? I know that there's an age limit to that.
Yeah, it's 15 years old. From 15 years old up, people can gorilla trek. But as I said, you can sometimes get permission for older 14-year-olds, someone who's maybe turning 15 within 6 months. Or if it's a family of 8, let's say, or, that's not the exact number, but 6, 7, or 8, and one of them is 14 and the others are all old enough. You can go to the gorilla HQs and say, listen, this is the family, but you'd have to get special permission for that. And you would have to do the trek privately. It had to be a private trek then. It couldn't be buying a permits for 4, 5, or 6 people.
Yeah, the permits are up to 8 people, or the groups are up to 8 people, correct, Alex?
Correct.
And is that
Correct.
on both countries, Philip? Both Rwanda and Uganda, is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Excellent. Any other questions? Oh, okay. I think.
It's lovely to see. It's lovely to see people addicted to Africa. Fantastic.
I know.
And all the kind words. It's a pleasure to present to everyone on that side of the world.
It truly is. I agree. Are there any aside from obviously all the animal side of the sites, etc., are there any other things to do, say in Uganda, pre or post doing any of the trekkings, like villages, etc.? I did one, so I wonder what is the take of it.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of community involvement. The Batwa tribe, which is this photo that's still on screen, you can go and visit the Batwa tribe. You can learn, and if you're really adventurous like me, you can taste their homemade beers, their homemade spinach dishes. It's an acquired taste, but it's part of the experience. You learn, you dance with them, you get involved with the actual community. So there's a lot of experiences like that. Further north, there are, Uganda, as you'll know, Natalia, has over 50 tribes, which makes it an immensely diverse country.
Very.
From where you are around Bwindi to when you go to Queen Elizabeth, which is only about a 4-hour drive, you would have completely different people dressing in completely different ways with completely different cultures. It's a very cultural heavy destination, and integrating that into an itinerary is really important. Kampala is also known as the party center of East Africa. People drive through from Tanzania and Kenya to Kampala to party on a weekend. So if anyone's interested in getting to know the party life, there's obviously that.
Yeah, and they also seem to have quite active nightlife. I'm talking about not only the partying and the drinking, but after that. So
Absolutely.
it's why this place is so populated. And what Alex maybe didn't get across there was when you drive from the one to the other, like 3-4 hours, they speak a completely different language. There are those 50 tribes also have like 50 languages.
Absolutely.
I think it's so neat to talk about this because I think in general, when looking at luxury, we're so used to in some cases to see the so-called tribes that, looks like tribes, and they turn around and they put a, Nike t-shirt 2 minutes after. So, but in this case, it's exactly what it is. It's not manipulated in any way. So I do think it's important to clarify that you really get immersed if that's what you want to do. It's an actual possibility.
Absolutely. I see Patricia asked to support with backpacks during the trek and carrying. So you can get.
No, we never covered the porters, in fact, Alex.
Yeah.
It's important.
So in every trek, we recommend that people use what's called a porter, which is a person from the local community who will help you carry your backpack or your lunch, and help you through very slippery parts. And I'd like to say I'm quite an athletic person, but walking up and down the mountains of Uganda humbled me very quickly. But with my porter, Nohiri
Called the
James.
impenetrable forest for a reason, isn't it, Alex?
Exactly. I will never forget his name. His name was Nohiri James, and he helped me. He could run up and down those mountains backwards, it felt like, but he would go ahead of you. He'd have your backpack. He'd put his hand out. He'd keep you balanced. The same as in Rwanda, and it's a minimal cost. It's about $15 to $30, depending on which side of the mountain you're on. It goes directly to a community member who are eager to do this work, because to them it's just a Sunday stroll. It's their normal thing. So if they can make some money out of it, they do it. And it's just another interaction with that culture and with the community that we're mentioning now. There's also services in both countries for someone who is unable to trek but always has wanted to see gorillas, to be carried up the mountain on stretchers. They're like we don't have a photo of them on this presentation, but I think I will include one in the follow-up, which is basically about 6 community members will come. There's a seated carrying device that you sit into. And remember, this is for someone who's 75, 80 years old, who's always had it on their bucket list to see gorillas or see chimpanzees, but can't walk up the mountains anymore. They'll purposely find a family that they know is close to the gorilla starting point. They'll carry you to the family, and you get out of the seat and you just sit and interact with these animals. So even if someone is not as mobile as they once were, there's something that can be done for them in terms of that. So there's assistance everywhere. And I hope that answered your question, Patricia.
Yeah, I also want to say that the porters, in a lot of cases, it is the only cash income that they have. So it's really, not to take one is a bit silly, because the cost is minimal, and it really does help the local community.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
indeed. That's a great point, Philip, because I do think that there is, in some cases, there might be, I remember for me, there was this intention of like, perhaps it feels wrong in some ways that someone is carrying your things, and yet this is exactly like the livelihood. So more than happy to do this. There is a really great question here about what does one need to do the trekking? Like what kind of gear does one need?
So at a lot of the ultra luxury lodges, your Singitas, your one and onlys, your wilderness Passatis, a lot of the gear is in the camp. They have hiking boots for every size, they have trekking pants, they have walking poles, the gloves for nettles and everything like that. But everything I've sort of mentioned is you would need good hiking shoes that you've worn in before, not ones that you've just bought a week before, preferably, because it is really tough hiking. You would need good hiking pants and a nice breathable shirt that you would want to exercise in. Hiking gloves, but again, that gets given to you at the Gorilla HQ. A walking pole, again, you get given a walking pole at the Gorilla HQ, but if you want a specific one that helps you, you can bring one. And other than that, you just need sort of the determination to trek. It's just, yeah, a good pair of walking shoes, a hat. Something that a lot of people forget is sunscreen. When you are that close or that high up in altitude, the sun is even harsher and the UV index is higher. A lot of people forget sunscreen and it dehydrates them quicker. But everything sort of is on ground there for you to take once you're there.
Yeah.
Alex, briefly between both destinations, aside from the cost of the permits for both, overall, when looking at 5-star versus Rwanda versus Uganda, from a lodge perspective, what's the difference in cost per person per day?
So, from a lodge perspective, I can quickly round up quickly. Let's use Singita. It's a name brand that a lot of people know, and let's use High Season. High Season is $3,525 per person per night sharing.
That's before you do the trek.
That's
Correct.
before the trek, that's before transfers, that's before other activities. It's $3,500 per person per night. For the equivalent in Uganda, this is the highest product, is Cilia, which is going to be $2,000 per person per night. Currently, before Cilia is open, any of these three products, my pick would be between Bwindi Lodge and Clouds. Is $1,470 or $1,275. So we're effectively looking at half the price to travel to Uganda at the top end of each country. Yes, the service and luxury levels aren't the same, but they are the highest end from each country in their own regard. Then, of course, on top of that, you have to add in the gorilla permits, which again are double the price in Rwanda compared to Uganda. Getting around the big expense that makes Uganda a bit more expensive and brings that average per person per night cost up is the fact that you have to fly. You can drive it, but I would not recommend it and wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy to drive from. And Natalia, did you drive from Entebbe to?
No, I flew.
I would say I drove.
I'm smart too.
No one else
No.
had to. I drove, so no one else had to. And those flights are quite expensive. They can range from $400 to $500 per person per flight, $1,000 for 2 flights. So it does add up, especially if you do more than 2 flights. But again, you're saving close to $1,500, $1,600 per person per night on accommodation.
Correct.
For a once-off flight cost. So overall, Uganda is
and
much
then
less.
there is some requirements for those flights as well, because obviously the planes are not big planes, correct, Alex?
Yeah, exactly. So in low season, we run into stuff called inducement costs. This is where a certain number of people have to be on the flight for the flight to take off. And if those number of people aren't met, you have to buy the excess ticket. So usually the inducement cost is 4 people on a flight. So if you have a couple who's traveling and they want to go on a flight, if there's no one else on that plane, they have to buy another 2 tickets or else the plane won't take off. Usually that happens on confirmation to secure the plane, and the money for the excess tickets, if it's filled, gets refunded back. And then, of course, as you were mentioning, it's only 12 people per flight. So demand can be quite high in high season, so flights become quite expensive because the supply is quite low. And where you fly into, Kihihi airstrip has quite high landing fees. So those all get factored into the ticket costs. So that's where the sort of extras bill can sort of add up.
Yeah, I think you also want to add that it's about an hour and a half drive from that airstrip still to the lodge.
Yeah, and in my
Yes.
opinion, that's the beautiful part of the drive. It's
That is
when
the
you're
most beautiful part.
on the non-tarred roads, there's no bumps except for the natural potholes that have been carved out by the rain. Driving through the communities that exist around Bwindi,
It's beautiful and very green, beautiful.
absolutely, super lush.
Yeah, very, very green. Yeah. This is wonderful. Any
Marilda,
other questions that we can answer? Anything else that Alex, Philip, that you feel like you want to add while we're trying to close this session?
I would like to add that in Rwanda, in Kigali, there is quite an active art scene and making of
Amazing.
artifacts and so on. So there's a number of art galleries to go to and visit. And Alex mentioned that we had the goat skewer or society, we call it the meat on a stick, on the way up to the lodge. Well, when we came back, we went to Sundowners. You can pull it up on Google and have a look. It's the #1 restaurant in Kigali, and booking is essential. But it was really fun with having lots of goat's
It's
ribs and local.
It's not your refined restaurants that someone may expect in Cape Town or in other parts of Africa that now exist, which is fantastic. It is very homegrown, home cooked, local vibe, which is brilliant. I see Tori is also asking packing requirements for air transfer. It's the same as most fixed wing flights. It's soft-sided luggage with a weight allowance of 15 kilograms. If you take a private charter, you can get more kilograms and you can have bigger bags, but they have to be soft-sided because they have to fit into the hold of the aircraft below.
And we can buy additional overweight luggage. Of course, people should not go crazy with that because they're not going to need it anywhere they go. None of this is sort of high fashion.
Marilda, thank you for joining, and I'm glad to see someone who's been bitten by the African bug, as we say. Tori, what do you recommend for transfers for chimp trekking, gorilla trekking in Uganda? When you say transfers, I assume you're referring to the on-ground transfers around. Again, you would have a private guide and a private vehicle that would take you from your lodge to the gorilla or chimpanzee HQ. From the gorilla and chimpanzee HQ, you would then drive to your trekking point, all by the same vehicle and the same guide who would be with you during your entire duration of your stay. The only time in Uganda's case they may not be is if you're like Natalia flying between Entebbe and Bwindi. They would stay in Bwindi, you would fly to back to Entebbe, and you would be picked up by a different vehicle and guide.
Yeah. So
I hope that clarifies it. How do you get to chimp trekking from Entebbe? So you would fly to one of the chimpanzee forests, so Kibale, Murchison Falls, Similiki. From there, you would stay in your accommodation for the night. And then the next day you would go chimp trekking. You would get picked up from your hotel, go to a chimp trekking HQ, picked up from the chimp trekking HQ after you've had your briefing, taken to the launch point and start your trek from wherever the trek point begins. And then just like gorilla trekking, you would then be picked up after your experience and driven back to your hotel. Vivian says she can't wait to come. We can't wait to have you, Vivian.
I saw all those hints from Vivian.
Wonderful, really wonderful.
And
all right, I think
lovely
we
to
can
see you, Cecilia.
We can close this session. This was absolutely incredible. I think everybody gets really inspired and pumped and wants to talk about everybody about Africa as a destination, but very specifically about Rwanda and Uganda, which are two very sought after destinations. So thank you both, Philip and Alex. This was absolutely incredible. For everybody here, we will send you an email with this presentation so that you have the information handy. And of course, if you need anything between now and then, feel free to reach out to the team. I don't know, Pau, if there is anything else that I'm missing.
No, it's all good. I'll just say em português. A gente vai mandar a informação para todo mundo por e-mail, a apresentação, os contatos da Journey, e o que vocês precisarem, a gente está à disposição.
Wonderful. Thank you,
How do you
everybody.
say, Alex, em português? Goodbye.
And,
Obrigada.
Spanish.
Tchau.
Obrigado.
There you go.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you, thank
Thank you.
you.
Tchau,
Gracias.
obrigada.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye, Cecilia.